I am Natalie, 34 years old, and until a month ago, I thought I had a solid foundation for my life. I arrived at our fifth wedding anniversary dinner at a luxury restaurant holding the arm of a complete stranger. My husband laughed out loud, pointing at the man beside me, and joked in front of his family, asking if I was introducing my new boyfriend. Everyone chuckled except for his beautiful young female coworker. The laughter died instantly when I smiled and said no, I actually brought a special guest. Meet your lover's husband. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to destroy a toxic relationship to save your dignity. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I evaluate the true worth of properties for a living. I look past fresh paint and expensive staging to find hidden structural damage. Sadly, I failed to apply those professional skills to my marriage. My husband Harrison was a wealth manager for a top-tier firm. He was 36, charming, impeccably dressed, and obsessed with appearances. His family was worse. His parents, Richard and Patricia, treated wealth as a personality trait and looked down on anyone who had to work for their money. His sister Lauren was a younger version of her mother, judging my practical outfits and long working hours. For 5 years, I tolerated their condescending remarks. I smiled politely when Patricia suggested I quit my demanding job to host charity luncheons. I stayed quiet when Richard implied my middle-class upbringing made me lucky to marry into their elite circle. I bought into the illusion of our partnership, thinking we were building a future together. But illusions shatter, eventually leaving behind nothing but cold, hard truth. It all came crashing down 1 week before our fifth anniversary. I stumbled upon a hidden folder on Harrison's home office computer while looking for a tax document. It contained hotel receipts, expensive jewelry invoices, and deeply romantic emails. They were not for me. They were for Monica, his 31-year-old financial consultant. Instead of crying or confronting him immediately, I did what I do best. I assessed the situation, gathered data, and formulated a precise valuation of his betrayal. I did some digging and found out Monica was not single. She was married to a man named David, a 35-year-old forensic accountant. I reached out to David. We met, shared our undeniable evidence, and planned a specific response to their unbelievable cruelty. That brings us to the night of our anniversary. Harrison had booked a private dining room at a luxury downtown steakhouse. He framed it as an intimate family celebration, but it was really another opportunity for him to show off his success. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the private room, the scene before me was sickeningly perfect. The room glowed with warm chandelier light reflecting off crystal wine glasses and polished silver cutlery. Harrison sat at the head of the long table holding court like a king. Richard and Patricia were nodding along to whatever boastful story he was telling. Lauren was scrolling on her phone, looking completely bored with the entire world. But the detail that truly made my blood boil was sitting directly to Harrison's right. Monica. She was wearing a stunning red silk dress, leaning in far too close to my husband. Her hand rested casually near his elbow. She was playing the role of the devoted coworker, seamlessly integrated into my family. The sheer audacity of her sitting there smiling at my in-laws on my anniversary was staggering. It proved just how little respect Harrison had for our vows and for me as a person. I took a deep breath, smoothing the soft fabric of my dress. Beside me, David stood tall and perfectly composed, his face an unreadable mask. We walked into the room together, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The conversation immediately stopped. Harrison's eyes darted from me to the tall, unfamiliar man standing by my side. A smug, arrogant smile spread across my husband's handsome face. He obviously assumed I was trying to make him jealous by bringing a random date to our family dinner. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he announced, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "And who exactly is this? Introducing your new boyfriend at our anniversary dinner, Natalie." Patricia gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace in mock horror at my supposed infidelity. Richard scowled, shaking his head in absolute disgust at my apparent lack of class. Lauren actually let out a short laugh, finding the whole dramatic situation highly entertaining. But Monica did not laugh at all. Her perfectly contoured face drained of all color in a matter of seconds. Her bright eyes widened in absolute terror as she recognized the handsome man standing right next to me. I kept my voice perfectly level, letting the heavy silence stretch for just a moment before I delivered the absolute truth. "I am not introducing my boyfriend Harrison," I said loudly enough for the sound to bounce off the rich paneled walls of this incredibly pretentious room. "I just thought it was incredibly unfair that you brought your financial consultant to our anniversary dinner while her loving husband sat at home. So I invited him to join us. Everyone please meet David, Monica's husband." The incredibly expensive crystal wine glass slowly slipped from Monica's desperately trembling fingers. It violently hit the polished edge of the heavy wooden table and shattered onto the pristine hardwood floor, sending dark red wine splashing everywhere like spilled blood. The sharp, sudden crash echoed loudly through the room, followed by a heavy, suffocating silence that changed absolutely everything forever and left them all entirely speechless. The shattering glass broke the spell that had frozen the room. Red wine seeped into the expensive cream rug, but nobody moved. Harrison was the first to recover his voice. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded completely unnatural. He clapped his hands slowly, shaking his head with a patronizing smile. "Wow, Natalie, wow," he said, his tone dripping with fake concern. "This is quite the performance. I know we talked about how stressed you are with the spring appraisal season, but this is a new level of paranoia." He turned to his parents, spreading his hands in mock helplessness. "I told you guys she has been working too hard. The commercial real estate market is brutal right now, and she brings all that stress home. Now she is having a paranoid breakdown and dragging my colleagues into it." He looked back at me, eyes cold despite his smile. "Honey, you are embarrassing yourself. Monica is a crucial part of my team. Bringing a stranger here to pretend to be her husband is pathetic." The gaslighting was so practiced that I could almost understand why people fell for his lies. He was trying to rewrite reality, painting me as the hysterical, overworked wife to protect his pristine image. Before I could respond, Patricia stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She marched around the table, her face flushed with aristocratic fury. She aggressively grabbed my upper arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "What on earth is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. "How dare you cause a scene like this? Harrison has worked tirelessly to build his reputation, and you decide to ruin our anniversary dinner with these jealous delusions. Apologize to Monica right this instant, and tell this man to leave before I call the police." I looked down at her hand clutching my arm. "Let go of me, Patricia," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. "I will not apologize for exposing the truth, and I certainly will not apologize to the woman sleeping with my husband for the past 6 months." Patricia gasped and snatched her hand back. Richard stood up, puffing out his chest. "That is enough, Natalie. We welcomed you into this family, and this is how you repay us, with lies and public humiliation. You are clearly not well." Lauren chimed in, rolling her eyes. "Seriously, Natalie, you are acting completely unhinged. Go home and sleep it off. You are making everyone uncomfortable." They were closing ranks, forming a united front to protect their golden boy. They did not care about the truth. They only cared about the scandal. They wanted to silence me and maintain their illusion of upper-class perfection. But they were about to realize that I was not fighting this battle alone. Throughout the chaotic exchange, David remained silent. He had not reacted to Harrison's insults, Patricia's aggression, or the family's denial. He stood there, an imposing figure of calm authority, observing them like a scientist watching a predictable experiment. When Richard demanded that we leave, David finally moved. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He did not say a word. He stepped forward and tossed the envelope onto the center of the dining table. The flap opened upon impact, sending a thick stack of glossy 8 by 10 photographs sliding across the polished wood, stopping right next to Harrison's dinner plate. The room went dead silent again. The forced smiles and aggressive postures vanished instantly. "Take a look, Harrison," David said, his voice deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Since my wife seems to have lost her voice, maybe the pictures can speak for her." Harrison just stared at the photos, his arrogant expression melting into pure, unadulterated panic. Patricia and Richard leaned in to look, their faces draining of color as they registered what was in the images. They were high-definition, indisputable proof. David was a forensic accountant, a man whose career revolved around uncovering hidden truths. When he suspected his wife was cheating, he did not just snoop through her phone. He hired a private investigator who used professional equipment to document everything. The top photograph showed Harrison and Monica walking into the lobby of a boutique hotel in Chicago. Harrison had his hand resting intimately on the small of Monica's back. The next photo showed them kissing passionately inside the elevator. The timestamps printed in the bottom corner were from exactly 3 weeks ago. That was the exact weekend Harrison told me he was attending a highly intensive solo corporate retreat to secure wealthy investors. He had complained for days about how boring it was going to be, packing his most conservative suits and kissing me goodbye with a heavy sigh. He even called me from the hotel room, complaining about the room service and telling me how much he missed me. I pointed at the photographs, ensuring everyone got a good look. A solo corporate retreat. Harrison, is that what you call it? I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. Because that looks exactly like a penthouse suite to me. And your financial consultant seems to be consulting you on something far more personal than asset allocation. Patricia covered her mouth with her hands, sinking back into her chair. Richard stared at the photos in stunned silence, unable to formulate a defense for his son. Lauren actually stopped looking at her phone, her eyes darting nervously between her brother and the undeniable evidence of infidelity. The gaslighting was over. There was no more room for lies, no more ways to twist the narrative and blame my supposed stress. The absolute and undeniable truth was laid bare on the table for all of them to clearly see. Harrison had been caught cornered and completely exposed by the very people he thought he had outsmarted. The silence in the room stretched heavily. I watched the arrogant smirk completely melt off Harrison's face, replaced by a dark, twisted expression. The charming wealth manager was gone. In his place stood a cornered animal stripped of his carefully constructed lies. He looked from the photographs to me and then to David. His chest heaved as his breathing grew heavy. Monica was openly sobbing now, covering her face with her trembling hands, but Harrison did not spare her a single glance. His furious eyes were locked entirely on me. "You think you are clever, Natalie?" He spat, his voice vibrating with pure venom. "You think you can march in here, humiliate me in front of my family, and walk away without consequences?" "I am not trying to be clever, Harrison," I replied, maintaining my perfectly calm posture. "I am simply shining a bright light on reality, something you struggle to do." Patricia finally found her voice. "Harrison, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me these pictures are doctored," she pleaded, looking desperately at her son. "Shut up, Mom," Harrison snapped, silencing her instantly. It was a shocking display of disrespect, but he was too enraged to care about maintaining his perfect son persona. He took a threatening step toward me, his hands balled into tight fists. "You want to play games?" he sneered, pulling his smartphone from his tailored jacket pocket. "Fine. But you are going to learn a very hard lesson about financial consequences today. I manage our money. I control the accounts. I am going to freeze every joint asset we have. Let us see how confident you feel when your credit cards are declined and you cannot even buy a cup of coffee tomorrow morning." He was trying to use his professional power to intimidate me. As a wealth manager, he always believed he held the absolute financial upper hand in our relationship. He tapped the screen of his phone, his thumb swiping rapidly to open his banking application. "I am locking it all down right now," he threatened, his eyes fixed intensely on the screen. You are going to leave this restaurant with absolutely nothing to your name. I did not flinch. I just stood there next to David and watched the exact moment Harrison's world imploded. It happened in seconds. The angry flush on his cheeks vanished, draining away until his skin was sickly gray. His thumb hovered over the screen, frozen in midair. He blinked rapidly, staring at the numbers displayed on his device, as if they were written in a foreign language. He frantically tapped the screen, refreshing the application over and over again, hoping it was a network error. "What is wrong, Harrison?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "Is the account balance not exactly what you expected to see?" He looked up at me, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Where is the money, Natalie? Where did it go?" I smiled a slow, calculated smile. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I spend my days evaluating risk and securing value. Did you really think I would walk into this confrontation without securing my own assets first? You severely underestimate me. Exactly 24 hours ago, while you were busy buying Monica another expensive gift, I went directly to the bank. I presented our joint account agreements and legally withdrew my exact 50% share of every single liquid asset we possessed. The savings, the emergency fund, the joint brokerage accounts. I drained my half down to the very last penny and moved it into a secure individual account that you cannot touch. "You had no right," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I had every legal right," I countered smoothly. "It was marital property, and I took only my fair share. I left your 50% intact so you can easily pay for this ridiculous dinner and whatever hotel room you plan to book tonight." David finally spoke up, his deep voice cutting through Harrison's panic. "And as a forensic accountant, I made absolutely sure she executed every single transfer in strict accordance with state banking laws. There is nothing you can do to reverse it, Harrison. You are a wealth manager. You should have diversified your personal risk a little better." The sudden realization that he had been completely outsmarted broke Harrison's remaining composure. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed both of his hands down on the dining table, making the silverware rattle loudly and causing his mother to jump in her seat. "Get out!" he roared, his voice echoing sharply off the walls. He turned to the heavy mahogany doors and screamed for the restaurant staff. "Manager, security, get these people out of my sight right now. I want them thrown out into the street." A flustered restaurant manager pushed through the doors, followed closely by two burly security guards. They looked around the chaotic room, taking in the spilled wine, the crying woman, and the furious man shouting orders at the top of his lungs. "Sir," the manager started, clearly unsure of how to handle the elite clientele acting so poorly. "Is there a problem here that we can assist with? These two are trespassing," Harrison yelled, pointing a shaking finger at David and me. "Remove them from the premises immediately." The security guards took a hesitant step toward us, but David held up a single hand. "There is no need for a scene," David said, projecting a natural authority that made the guards pause in their tracks. "We were just leaving anyway." I looked at Harrison one last time, taking in his disheveled hair, his panicked eyes, and his crumbling empire. His family sat frozen in their chairs, unable to comprehend the disaster that had just unfolded before them. Monica was still sobbing quietly into her white linen napkin, knowing her own life was equally ruined. "Happy anniversary." "Harrison," I said, my voice perfectly steady, clear and calm. "Enjoy your steak." I turned my back on him. David offered me his arm and I took it without hesitation. We walked out of the private dining room together, our footsteps synchronized and confident. We glided past the bewildered manager and the hesitant security guards, leaving the suffocating tension of the room far behind us. We did not run. We did not look back once. We walked through this crowded main dining area with our heads held high, stepping out into the cool evening air on our own terms, completely victorious. The cool night air hit my face as David and I stepped out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. The adrenaline that had carried me through the private dining room was beginning to recede, leaving behind a sharp, focused clarity. David signaled for a passing taxi. We did not exchange any meaningless chatter on the ride. He simply nodded respectfully when I told him I needed to head back to my house to pack my personal belongings. We exchanged contact information, agreeing to coordinate our next legal moves in the morning. He departed in the taxicab while I walked up the driveway of the elegant colonial house I had called home for 5 years. I stared at the beautiful architecture, feeling a deep sense of betrayal. The neighborhood was incredibly quiet, the street lined with manicured lawns and perfectly spaced streetlights. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I knew exactly what this property was worth. I had tracked its appreciating value every single quarter. I stepped onto the familiar front porch and reached into my designer purse for my house keys. I slid the heavy brass key into the deadbolt and turned. It did not budge. Frowning, I pulled the key out and tried again, jiggling the handle with a bit more force. The lock was completely rigid. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I examined the hardware under the bright porch light. The brass cylinder was brand new. It lacked the tiny scratch near the keyhole that I had accidentally made 2 years ago. Harrison had changed the locks. He had actually anticipated my exit and paid a locksmith emergency rates to rekey the entire house while he was getting ready for our anniversary dinner. He knew exactly what was coming. He planned this vicious lockout perfectly, ensuring I would be left completely stranded on the street without any of my personal items or clothing. My smartphone buzzed violently in my hand. The screen illuminated the dark porch with a new text message from Harrison. It was not a desperate plea or an apology. It was a clear, high-resolution photograph of a formal legal document, a formal warning against trespassing. The text beneath the image read exactly like the arrogant wealth manager he was. Do not even think about stepping foot inside. This property is fully protected. If you attempt to break a window or force entry, I will call the police and press charges for breaking and entering. Go find a cheap hotel. My jaw tightened. He used the asset I bled to acquire as a weapon against me. I refused to walk away without my essential work documents and personal identification. I dialed the non-emergency police dispatch number, standing firmly on the front porch. A dispatcher answered promptly. I calmly explained that I was undergoing a sudden marital separation and needed a civil standby to collect my personal belongings because my husband had illegally locked me out of our primary residence. The dispatcher asked a standard procedural question. Madam, are you currently listed on the property deed or the lease agreement? I closed my eyes as the bitter reality of my past naive decisions washed over me. No, I am not on the deed, I explained into the phone, my voice tight with suppressed frustration. I paid the entire $200,000 down payment from my personal savings 5 years ago. But my husband and his parents manipulated the paperwork. I paced the wooden porch, laying out the financial trap I walked into. Right before closing, Richard and Patricia convinced me that putting the house under their family trust was a brilliant wealth management strategy. They claimed it would shield us from capital gains taxes and protect the asset from future corporate liabilities. I remember sitting in their lavish living room while Patricia told me it was standard procedure for high net worth families. Because I loved Harrison, I signed the waiver relinquishing my claim to the title. I handed them $200,000 and the legal rights to my home. I let my guard down. The dispatcher was sympathetic but incredibly firm. I understand your frustration, madam, but if your name is not on the deed or the current utility bills, this is strictly a civil matter. The property belongs to the trust. If the legal owners have issued a trespassing warning, we cannot force them to let you inside. You will need to take this up with a family law attorney during regular business hours. If you try to force your way in tonight, we will have to respond to a break-in call. I thanked the dispatcher and ended the call. I stood alone on the porch of a home my money had secured, locked out by the people who smiled while stealing my equity. As a professional who spends her life evaluating commercial properties and spotting financial liabilities, I felt a deep wave of shame. I had been blind to the legal trap in my own life. Harrison and his family treated my money like a donation to their elite lifestyle. I looked at the wooden door one last time. There would be no screaming or breaking windows. Harrison wanted me to lose my temper so he could play the victim for the police during the inevitable divorce proceedings. I absolutely refused to give him that ammunition. I turned my back on the dark house and walked down the long driveway. I ordered a rideshare to a luxury hotel. The cash I secured earlier covered my expenses. Sitting in the car watching my neighborhood fade, the shame vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. They thought they held all the leverage because they owned the residential deed. But they forgot I evaluate commercial portfolios for a living. I was done playing by their rules. It was time to audit every single aspect of Harrison's perfect life and tear his fake empire straight down to the absolute ground. I woke up in a hotel bed. The memories of the anniversary dinner and the locked door rushed back. I reached for my smartphone. The screen was flooded with notifications, text messages, missed calls, and hundreds of social media alerts. My pulse quickened as I unlocked the device. I tapped the first notification, and a video began playing. It was Monica. She sat on a velvet sofa looking impeccably disheveled. Her makeup was smudged to suggest she had been crying for hours, and the lighting was angled to capture the tears in her eyes. The caption read, "The painful truth about my marriage." I turned up the volume and listened to the most brazen piece of fiction. "I never wanted to bring my private pain into the public eye," Monica whispered into the camera, her voice quivering with practiced vulnerability. "But after the ambush last night, I have to speak out. For the past year, my husband David and Harrison's wife Natalie have been carrying on a secret affair. Harrison and I discovered their betrayal months ago. We were devastated. Our worlds collapsed." She paused to wipe a tear from her cheek. "Harrison and I were two broken souls navigating the worst trauma of our lives. We leaned on each other for emotional support, because nobody else could understand the pain of being betrayed by the people we loved most. We were victims comforting victims. Last night, Natalie and David tried to humiliate us to cover up their twisted guilt. Please respect our privacy." I stared at the screen in disbelief. The audacity of her narrative was staggering. They were weaponizing social media to rewrite history and position themselves as the victims. I scrolled down to the comments section. The video was going viral within our high society circles. Harrison's sister Lauren had shared it with the caption, "Praying for my brother." Patricia had left a lengthy comment detailing how the family suspected I was hiding something dark, expressing gratitude that Harrison found support in Monica. It was a coordinated smear campaign. Harrison knew he could not stop me from taking my half of the liquid assets, so he deployed his family to destroy my reputation. They understood that in elite circles, perception was reality. If they could brand me as the initial cheater, Harrison's professional image as a wealth manager would remain untarnished. He would be the tragic hero, and I would be the villainous ex-wife. My first instinct was to draft an explosive response and post the photographs David provided. I wanted to burn their fabricated narrative to the ground immediately. But I forced myself to pause. Engaging in a public shouting match would make me look exactly like the unhinged woman they portrayed. I evaluate risk for a living. Reacting emotionally is a terrible investment strategy. I downloaded the video and captured screenshots of every single comment from Harrison's family. I archived all of it. It was evidence for the inevitable legal battle. Before I could fully process their deception, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of my boss at the commercial appraisal firm. My stomach tightened. Our firm catered to high-net-worth individuals. Discretion and professional reputation were everything. I answered the call, keeping my tone perfectly steady. "Natalie, I need you in my office right now," he said. "Do not stop at your desk. Come straight to me." I dressed quickly in a sharp, tailored suit. When I arrived at the firm, the administrative assistants avoided eye contact. The gossip had clearly reached the corporate level. I walked straight into my boss' office and took a seat. He did not offer me coffee. He pushed a tablet across his desk, playing the exact video I watched in my hotel room. "This is a nightmare, Natalie," he stated, rubbing his temples. "I had 3 phone calls this morning from major clients. One was Richard. Your father-in-law expressed deep concern about your current mental stability. He suggested you were engaging in erratic behavior and hinted our firm might suffer if we allowed personal scandals to bleed into our operations. I sat up straight, maintaining intense eye contact. My father-in-law is protecting his son who was caught having an affair. The video is a complete fabrication designed to perform damage control. I have the evidence to prove it. I do not care about evidence, Natalie. My boss interrupted, raising a hand to silence me. We deal in multi-million-dollar properties. Our clients trust us because we are stable and reliable. You are currently the center of a soap opera. Richard carries significant weight in this city. If he pulls his network from our firm, we lose millions in revenue. I cannot have that liability representing this company. Are you firing me? I asked, my voice remaining composed despite the sudden rush of panic. I am putting you on an indefinite unpaid suspension, he replied, refusing to meet my gaze. Until the dust settles on this divorce and your name is cleared, I cannot have you interfacing with our clients. Hand over your company laptop and your access badge on the way out. Harrison and his family were leveraging their wealthy connections to strip away every pillar of my independence. They locked me out of my house, destroyed my reputation online, and now they were actively trying to sever my sole source of income. They wanted me destitute, desperate, and begging for mercy. I stood up smoothly, placing my company badge on his desk. I will comply with the suspension, I said calmly. But you should know that you are allowing a manipulative family to dictate your business decisions. That is a poor appraisal of long-term value. I walked straight out of the office with my head held high. They thought taking my job would break my spirit. They were completely wrong. They just gave me unlimited free time to dedicate entirely to their complete and total destruction. Leaving the appraisal firm, I felt adrenaline. I dialed David. He answered quickly. I explained the situation with my boss and the fabricated video Monica posted online. David remained calm, agreeing we needed to strategize in person immediately. He suggested a retro diner on the outskirts of the city, far away from the luxury restaurants where Harrison's family held court. I arrived minutes later. The diner smelled faintly of coffee and fried bacon. David sat in a corner booth facing the entrance. I slid into the seat across from him. He had a yellow pad ready to work. They are trying to starve me financially and ruin my credibility, I told him, keeping my voice low. Harrison changed the locks. The property is under his parents' trust, so the police could not help me. Now my firm suspended me to protect their relationship with my father-in-law. David nodded slowly, writing on his pad. Monica filed a temporary restraining order against me this morning, he replied analytically. She claims I am a threat to her safety to justify moving out and taking half of our shared assets. They are executing a coordinated legal offensive. We need to look deeper into Harrison's finances to find his vulnerabilities. A tall, sharply dressed African-American man walked through the entrance. It was Jamal. He was 33 and married to Harrison's sister Lauren. My brother-in-law. My heart hammered against my ribs. I assumed he followed me here to deliver a legal threat or cause a scene. Jamal spotted us and walked straight toward our booth. He did not look hostile. He simply looked tired. He stopped at the edge of our table. Do you two mind if I sit down? Jamal asked, his voice remarkably calm. I tensed up. Did Harrison send you to intimidate me, Jamal? I asked sharply. Or did Richard want you to deliver a message about how I am ruining their family image? Jamal let out a bitter laugh, sliding into the booth next to David. Natalie, if Harrison or Richard knew I was sitting here, they would have a stroke. I am not here for them. I am here for me, and maybe for you too. Jamal was a brilliant tax attorney. He possessed a sharp mind and an impeccable record. Yet despite his success, Richard and Patricia treated him like a second-class citizen. They constantly made passive-aggressive comments about his working-class upbringing. They delivered subtle, racially charged microaggressions, disguised as polite conversation. They looked down on him because he did not inherit a trust fund and because of the color of his skin. I have spent 4 years sitting at their absurd dinner parties, biting my tongue while they talk down to me, Jamal said, leaning forward. They think because I am quiet, I do not notice their condescension. They think they are untouchable elites, but I see exactly who they are. They are hypocrites, building an empire on fake wealth and manipulation. When I saw the video Monica posted and watched Lauren blindly defend her cheating brother, I realized I was done playing their game. Jamal reached into his suit jacket. He pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive and placed it gently in the center of the table. It sat there between the coffee cups like a loaded weapon. "What is that?" David asked, his forensic accountant instincts kicking in. "That is Harrison's ultimate undoing," Jamal replied, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Harrison is arrogant. He thinks he is the smartest man in any room. Every Sunday when the family gathered at my house for dinner, Harrison would excuse himself. He claimed he needed to take important calls from high-net-worth clients. He would lock himself in my home office and connect to my private network." Jamal tapped the table next to the drive. He thought he was being clever. He assumed that by using my network he was hiding his tracks from his firm and from you, Natalie. He thought his late-night financial maneuvers were completely invisible. "But he underestimated you," I said, the pieces falling into place. "He severely underestimated me," Jamal confirmed. "Before I went to law school and became a tax attorney, my undergraduate degree was in computer science and cybersecurity. My home network is not a standard setup. It is heavily monitored and logged. The moment he connected his laptop to my system, my servers captured every single data packet he transmitted." David leaned forward, his eyes locked on the black flash drive. What exactly was he transmitting, Jamal? Jamal pushed the drive closer to David. "Massive, highly suspicious financial transfers, offshore routing, shell companies, tax evasion schemes. Harrison has been moving unbelievable amounts of money for the past 6 months, and he has been doing it under a corporate entity that is going to blow your mind." I stared at my brother-in-law, realizing the magnitude of the gift he handed us. He risked his marriage to bring us this information because he was fundamentally disgusted by their toxic behavior. "I am handing you the key to his kingdom," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. "I cannot be the one to pull the trigger because of my legal ties to Lauren. But you two have absolutely nothing left to lose. Take the drive, analyze the data, find out exactly where he hid the money, and burn his fake empire straight to the ground." David carefully picked up the encrypted USB drive, slipping it into his pocket. We looked at each other across the table, an unspoken agreement passing between us. The family thought they had successfully backed me into a corner. They thought their power and influence had completely destroyed my options. But they just handed a forensic accountant and a commercial appraiser the exact financial blueprint of their own destruction. The alliance was officially formed, and the real war was finally about to begin. We left the diner and immediately drove to David's temporary workspace in a corporate high-rise downtown. He had rented a short-term office after Monica filed her restraining order, ensuring he had a secure environment equipped with high-end computing hardware. The room was sterile and quiet, smelling faintly of fresh coffee and ozone from the servers. We sat side by side in front of a massive curved monitor. David plugged Jamal's encrypted flash drive into an isolated terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing basic security layers with the practiced ease of a seasoned forensic accountant. I watched lines of code scroll across the dark screen. The anticipation in the room was heavy. We were about to breach the financial walls Harrison had spent months building. A soft chime echoed in the quiet room as the decryption protocol completed. Folders appeared on the desktop. They were generically named, but David knew exactly where to look. He opened a master directory labeled Tax Preparation. It was a labyrinth of spreadsheets, bank statements, and wire transfer logs. David began sorting the data by transaction volume. His eyes scanned the numbers, tracking the flow of capital like a hunter tracking prey. He quickly isolated a series of massive withdrawals originating from our joint brokerage accounts, the same accounts I had drained 24 hours ago. But these hidden records showed a history of quiet, systematic siphoning that started 6 months ago, right around the time his illicit affair with Monica began. Look at this routing pattern, David said, pointing to a cluster of financial transactions on the screen. He is not just moving cash, he is layering it. He is transferring funds through two intermediary accounts before depositing them into a primary holding account. This is classic asset concealment behavior. I leaned closer, my commercial appraiser instincts kicking in as I carefully looked at the destination details. The money was not sitting idle in an offshore account somewhere. It was being actively consolidated for a major domestic purchase. I pointed to a recurring string of text attached to the largest wire transfers. What is that acronym right there? David highlighted the text and cross-referenced it with a separate legal folder on the private drive. It is a limited liability company, he replied, his voice tightening with intense anger. M&H Holdings, Monica and Harrison. They registered the corporate entity in Delaware to mask the ownership structure and avoid immediate detection. My blood turned to pure ice. They had built a corporate shell right under our noses. But a shell company needs a tangible asset to hold, otherwise it is completely useless. I scrolled through the folder labeled M&H Holdings and found a subfolder titled Acquisitions. I clicked it open immediately. Inside were hundreds of pages of commercial real estate contracts, appraisal reports, and loan agreements. I pulled up the primary deed of trust. My eyes darted across the dense legal jargon, instantly translating the complex real estate terminology into plain facts. Harrison had secretly purchased an abandoned warehouse district on the edge of the city's newly approved technology corridor. It was a massive revitalization project with astronomical potential yield. The purchase price was nearly $3 million. How did he possibly fund this? I asked, my voice barely above an angry whisper. He does not have that kind of liquid capital, even with his massive corporate salary. David opened the financial prospectus attached to the acquisition documents. He secured a commercial bridge loan for exactly $2.5 million. Bridge loans are short-term, high-interest loans used to close deals rapidly before permanent financing can be properly secured. They require massive and highly verifiable collateral. I felt the breath completely leave my lungs as I read the collateral schedule listed on the final loan documents. Harrison had not just used his own personal assets. He had maliciously leveraged the deed to our residential home, the exact same home his parents pressured me to place in their family trust. He somehow used his elite status as a primary trust beneficiary to pledge the valuable property as collateral behind my back. But it was far worse than that. He had also tied the massive loan to the previous baseline of our joint savings accounts, artificially inflating his personal liquidity profile to satisfy the bank's strict lending covenants and secure the massive payout. He used my money and my house to buy commercial property with his mistress. I stated the harsh reality of the betrayal settling heavily in my chest. David kept reading the specific loan terms, his jaw clenching tight. It gets significantly worse, Natalie. Look at the corporate liability clause right here. Because the initial down payment originated from commingled marital funds, and because your name was quietly attached to the initial liquidity verification, you are technically a co-guarantor on the massive default risk. I stared at the bright screen, putting the final twisted pieces of his malicious puzzle together. This was never just a romantic affair, it was a highly orchestrated financial assassination. Harrison fully planned to file for divorce and completely blindside me with the sudden legal separation. During the complex asset division, he would use his parents' family trust to shield the residential home, leaving me totally homeless. Simultaneously, he would falsely claim M&H Holdings was a pre-existing independent business venture. Because of the specific way he structured the risky bridge loan, the crushing debt liability would fall squarely on my shoulders, while he and Monica walked away entirely clean with a prime piece of commercial real estate in a booming tech corridor. He wanted to bankrupt me while entirely funding his brand new life. He engineered a devious trap to leave me destitute and indebted for the rest of my natural life. I looked at David, the shock slowly fading into a cold and highly dangerous clarity. We possessed the exact blueprint of his massive financial fraud. I pulled the keyboard closer, opening the master file containing the commercial bridge loan agreement. It was the key to destroying his empire. The document was over 200 pages of dense, corporate legal text designed to confuse the average reader. But I am not an average reader. As a commercial real estate appraiser, I review these lending instruments every single day. Banks do not hand out $2.5 million without attaching severe strings. I scrolled past the standard indemnity clauses, hunting for the specific financial covenants. A bridge loan of this magnitude secured by an unproven shell company would require strict ongoing maintenance metrics. I found the section labeled Liquidity and Debt Service Coverage. My eyes scanned the fine print and a thrill of pure triumph shot through my veins. I found the fatal flaw in Harrison's grand design. Explain it in appraiser terms, David requested. I highlighted the dense paragraph on the bright monitor. This is a continuous liquidity covenant, I explained, my voice steady. Because M&H Holdings is a brand new entity, the regional bank took a massive risk granting them this commercial loan. To mitigate that risk, the bank legally mandated that Harrison maintain a minimum liquid cash balance of exactly $500,000 across his linked financial portfolios at all times. If his verified liquidity drops below that threshold for more than 48 hours, he triggers a technical default. The joint accounts, David said, his voice laced with realization. You drained your 50% share yesterday. Yes, I confirmed, smiling coldly. I legally withdrew my half of our marital assets, which amounted to roughly $400,000. By taking my rightful share, I decimated his required liquidity reserve. Harrison is currently sitting well below the bank's mandated threshold. The moment he formally separates his assets from mine during a divorce, he is in immediate breach of his commercial loan covenant. The bank will exercise their right to accelerate the debt, demanding the entire $2.5 million be paid back instantly. That is brilliant, David murmured, staring at the screen. But we need to ensure that when this corporate structure collapses, it burns his professional reputation to the absolute ground. Let me look at the corporate formation documents for M&H Holdings. If Harrison was arrogant enough to leverage your marital home, he was arrogant enough to cut corners on his tax filings. David opened a directory containing the state incorporation papers and federal tax documents. He began running the employer identification numbers through a secure background verification database he utilized for his forensic accounting investigations. The employer identification number is essentially a social security number for a business. It is required to open commercial bank accounts, pay employees, and file taxes. I watched as David cross-referenced the numbers Harrison had submitted to the regional bank. His brow furrowed in deep concentration. David let out a low whistle of utter disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I thought Harrison was just a greedy narcissist, David stated, keeping his eyes glued to the monitor. But he is actually a federal criminal. What did he do? I asked. He committed severe banking fraud, David explained, pointing to a mismatched sequence of numbers. When you apply for a multi-million-dollar commercial loan, the bank scrutinizes every individual associated with the borrowing entity. Monica has terrible personal credit. I found out last month she has massive outstanding debts from a failed retail venture she tried to launch before we got married. If the bank saw her true financial history attached to M&H Holdings, they would have rejected the bridge loan application immediately. So how did they get approved? I asked. Harrison fabricated the corporate structure, David said, tapping the screen. He did not use Monica's actual social security number to register her as a primary partner. He used a stolen employer identification number from a dissolved subsidiary company that his wealth management firm previously managed. He attached that dead number to Monica, creating a ghost profile for her. He presented fraudulent documents to a federally insured regional bank to secure $2.5 million. That is not a civil dispute, Natalie. That is a federal offense carrying a mandatory prison sentence. We have him, I stated, the absolute certainty vibrating in my chest. He is completely trapped. If he tries to divorce me and take the house, he breaches the continuous liquidity covenant and loses the commercial property. If he tries to save the commercial property by asking his father for a bailout, we expose the federal bank fraud and send him straight to prison. David securely ejected Jamal's encrypted flash drive. We have the ammunition, David agreed, slipping the drive back into his tailored jacket pocket. But we cannot just hand this over to the police right now. Harrison is a connected wealth manager with a ruthless corporate legal team. They will find a way to bury the evidence or claim it was an administrative clerical error. We need to back him into a corner where he legally incriminates himself, beyond a shadow of a doubt. How do we do that? I asked. We let him think he is winning. David replied, a dangerous edge creeping into his composed voice. He is going to push for a rapid divorce settlement to secure his assets before his commercial loan compliance check fails. He will try to force you into signing away your rights to the marital home using intimidation and threats. We are going to let him do exactly that. You are going to walk into his lawyer's office and give him exactly what he demands. By forcing me to sign away my assets, Harrison would legally document his own financial ruin. He thought he was playing chess, but he was walking blindfolded into a minefield. Let him call his expensive corporate lawyers, I said. I am truly ready to sign. The summons arrived less than 48 hours later, exactly as David predicted. It was a heavy courier-delivered envelope containing a formal mandate to appear at the downtown offices of a highly aggressive corporate litigation firm. They did not even use a standard family law practice. Harrison wanted to intimidate me with a massive corporate entity that specialized in crushing smaller opponents through sheer financial attrition. I put on my sharpest appraisal suit, a charcoal gray two-piece that commanded absolute respect, and drove downtown. The weather was appropriately bleak, matching the cold and sterile environment I was about to enter. I parked my car in the subterranean garage of the towering skyscraper and rode the glass elevator up to the 40th floor. The reception area was an intimidating expanse of white marble and brushed steel, designed specifically to make incoming adversaries feel exceptionally small and financially inadequate. I approached the reception desk and stated my name with perfect composure. The receptionist did not offer a greeting, simply gesturing for me to wait in a stiff leather chair. After several minutes, a paralegal escorted me down a long, silent hallway into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the sprawling city skyline. Harrison was already seated at the far end of the sprawling mahogany table. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit looking completely revitalized. He firmly believed he had regained total control of the narrative. Sitting directly to his right was his mother, Patricia. She wore a pristine designer dress and stared at me with an expression of absolute disgust, as if I were a foul stain on the expensive leather chair I was about to occupy. To Harrison's left sat his attorney, a sharply dressed man named Donovan, who radiated the predatory energy of a hungry shark smelling fresh blood in the water. I sat down at the opposite end of the long table, placing my hands neatly on the polished wood. I did not bring a lawyer. That decision was highly calculated. Showing up unrepresented signaled to their arrogant minds that I was defeated, vulnerable, and entirely out of options. Let us skip the pleasantries. Donovan began, his voice booming across the empty space. My client wishes to expedite the dissolution of this marriage with minimal public disruption. We have prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement that resolves all asset division immediately. You will find that my client is being exceedingly generous considering your erratic and completely unhinged behavior at his anniversary dinner. I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not react to the direct insult or the aggressive tone. I simply looked at the thick stack of legal documents resting in front of the attorney. Donovan tapped the heavy stack of paper with a gold pen. As you are well aware, Natalie, the primary residential property is entirely owned by your in-laws' family trust. You have zero legal claim to the deed or the equity. The documents in front of me require you to formally waive any and all marital claims to the property, verifying that you understand the house is a protected asset. Furthermore, this settlement includes a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will be legally barred from discussing my client's private life, his professional standing, or his relationship with his financial consultant, Monica. If you violate this non-disclosure agreement, you will face immediate financial ruin. Patricia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. Her massive diamond rings caught the bright overhead light. "We are tired of your childish games, Natalie," she sneered, her voice dripping with aristocratic venom. "You embarrassed my son. You tried to humiliate our family in front of our peers. You are incredibly lucky we are even offering you a completely clean break. Sign the papers and disappear back to whatever mediocre life you had before Harrison rescued you from obscurity." Harrison remained silent, playing the role of the exhausted but benevolent victim. He watched me intently, waiting for me to break down crying or start screaming about the terrible injustice of it all. He desperately needed me to react emotionally to validate his narrative that I was an unstable woman. I looked calmly at the attorney. "And what exactly am I receiving in exchange for signing away my marital rights and agreeing to a lifetime gag order?" I asked, maintaining a perfectly even professional tone. Donovan slid a single piece of paper across the long table. It stopped directly in front of me. It was a certified bank check. I looked down at the amount printed on the crisp paper. $10,000. "That is a relocation fee," Donovan stated, leaning back in his expensive leather chair with a highly smug smile. "It is more than enough to cover the security deposit on a modest apartment and hire a moving company to collect whatever cheap clothing you left behind. My client recognizes that you are currently suspended from your appraisal firm and facing financial hardship. He is offering you a lifeline. I highly suggest you take it immediately." I stared at the $10,000 check. It was a monumental insult. I had personally paid the $200,000 down payment for the house they were stealing from me. I had contributed equally to our joint accounts for 5 years. They were offering me a tiny fraction of my own money and framing it as a generous act of supreme charity. And if I refused to accept this incredibly generous offer, I asked, keeping my eyes locked firmly on Harrison's arrogant face. Donovan let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "If you refuse, we will bury you, Natalie. We will drag this divorce out in the court system for the next 10 years. We will file injunction after injunction. We will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are forced to declare bankruptcy. You are currently suspended from your job without pay. You have absolutely no income, and you are up against a family with practically unlimited resources. You cannot possibly afford to fight us. You will lose everything you hold dear." Harrison finally spoke, his voice low and incredibly condescending. "Just take the deal, Natalie. You tried to ruin my life because you were jealous of my success. Now it is over. Take the $10,000 and walk away before I let Donovan absolutely destroy your entire future." They sat there radiating supreme confidence. They genuinely believed they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought the threat of prolonged corporate litigation and the immediate lack of income would force me into total submission. They thought I was a terrified, helpless woman who would eagerly sign anything just to escape their wrath. They did not realize that I already held the keys to their complete financial destruction. They did not know that by forcing me to sign away my rights to the marital home, they were actively triggering the massive default clause on Harrison's secret multi-million-dollar commercial bridge loan. I looked down at the documents waiting for me. I picked up the heavy black pen resting right next to the highly insulting check. I was now truly ready to sign. I held the heavy black pen in my hand, feeling the smooth, cool metal against my palm. The silence in the massive conference room was absolute. Donovan watched me with predatory anticipation, fully expecting me to throw the pen across the room or burst into tears. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes glittering with the thrill of a victory she believed she had orchestrated. I uncapped the pen. I did not hesitate. I pulled the first stack of documents toward me. It was the property relinquishment form. I read the clauses quickly but thoroughly, using the exact same speed and focus I applied to evaluating commercial real estate deeds. It was completely ironclad. It stated that I surrendered any and all current and future claims to the residential property, confirming it as the sole legal asset of the family trust. I signed my name on the dotted line with a sharp, fluid motion. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. He frowned, his brow furrowing as he watched me flip to the next page. This was not the reaction he had scripted in his mind. He needed me to beg. He needed me to validate his ego by fighting for him, or at least fighting for the house I had poured my savings into. My complete lack of emotional distress was deeply unsettling to his narcissistic worldview. I moved to the non-disclosure agreement. This document was thick with legal jargon designed to completely muzzle me. It forbade me from discussing his relationship with Monica, his professional conduct, or the circumstances of our divorce in any public or private forum. I signed the bottom of every single page. I initialed the margins exactly where the small yellow sticky notes directed me. I did not pause to argue. I did not look up to glare at them. I treated their ultimate weapon like a mundane piece of administrative paperwork. As the blue ink stained the crisp white paper, a profound sense of liberation washed over me. They thought they were stripping me of my assets. They thought they were leaving me destitute. They had absolutely no idea that they were actively saving me from a massive financial catastrophe. By legally detaching myself from the marital home, I was simultaneously severing my name from the underlying collateral of Harrison's secret commercial bridge loan. When he initially secured that $2.5 million payout for his shell company, he leveraged the house based on our joint marital status and the commingled funds used for the down payment. The bank accepted the risk because my pristine credit and our combined liquidity artificially inflated his financial stability. But the second I signed these specific divorce documents, that entire financial structure evaporated. I was no longer a co-guarantor. I was no longer legally associated with the collateral property. When the regional bank inevitably ran their routine compliance check on the commercial bridge loan, they would instantly detect a massive material change in the borrower's marital and financial status. Harrison's debt-to-income ratio was about to violently explode. He was willingly handing me the exact legal shield I needed to survive the devastating fallout of his own federal banking fraud. He assumed I was a naive wife who understood nothing about corporate finance. He forgot that I dissect commercial loan covenants every single day of my professional life. I reached the final page of the divorce settlement. I signed my full legal name one last time, applying extra pressure to the pen to make the signature bold and undeniable. I placed the cap back on the heavy black pen, setting it down softly on the polished mahogany table. I gathered the $10,000 certified bank check, folding it neatly and slipping it into my designer purse. I made sure my movements were slow and deliberate, conveying absolute calm. I pushed the thick stack of signed documents across the wide table back toward Donovan. The aggressive corporate lawyer actually looked confused. He had prepared for a vicious legal battle, and instead, I had surrendered the entire war in less than 5 minutes. He stared at the signature pages as if searching for a hidden forgery. He flipped through the stack twice, verifying that every single initial was in the correct place. Finding no errors, he gave Harrison a curt nod, confirming that the deed was legally done. "There you go, Donovan," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant and professional. "Everything is signed and dated exactly as you requested. I believe this concludes our business here today." Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. Finally, she muttered, leaning back in her chair and smoothing her designer dress. "Now we can finally put this embarrassing nightmare behind us and move forward." "You made the right choice, Natalie. Do not spend that check all in one place." Harrison stared at me, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. He was a wealth manager. He spent his entire life analyzing people and their relationship to money. He knew human nature. He knew that nobody walked away from a $200,000 investment with a $10,000 check and a smile unless they knew something he did not. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "Why are you acting like this, Natalie?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "You just signed away your house and your marriage. You are walking out of here with nothing. Why are you not fighting this?" I stood up from the leather chair, smoothing the fabric of my charcoal gray suit. I looked down at my soon-to-be ex-husband. "I am not fighting Harrison because I evaluate bad investments for a living," I replied. "And I know exactly when it is time to cut my losses and walk away." I grabbed my purse and turned toward the heavy glass doors. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. "I hope your new investments pay off." I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the conference room without looking back. The sound of my heels echoed down the long, sterile hallway of the 40th floor. The receptionist did not look up as I passed the pristine marble desk. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage. As the elevator descended, I felt a massive physical weight lift from my shoulders. The air in the small metal cabin tasted incredibly crisp. They genuinely believed they had won. They thought they had secured their precious real estate and legally bound me to absolute silence today. They had no idea they had just handed me the very weapon I needed to initiate their total collapse now. I reached my car and climbed into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and pulled my smartphone from my purse. I did not waste any time. I opened a secure messaging application and initiated a group audio call with David and Jamal. They answered almost simultaneously. Their voices were sharp and focused. "The settlement is signed." I announced, my voice steady and completely devoid of any hesitation. "The residential deed is fully relinquished and the non-disclosure agreement is executed. I am officially detached from the marital property and the collateral trust." There was a brief silence on the line before David spoke. "Did they suspect anything?" he asked. "Not a single thing," I replied, gripping the steering wheel. Harrison was confused by my lack of emotional distress, but his arrogance blinded him to the actual financial reality of what he just accomplished. Patricia was too busy celebrating to look closely at the mechanics. They took the bait perfectly. "Excellent," Jamal said, his deep voice resonating through the car speakers. "You played your part flawlessly, Natalie. Now it is our turn to execute the retaliation." I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. "Phase 2 is a go," I stated. "Let us burn it down." Across the city, Jamal sat in his private office. He locked the heavy oak door to ensure his wife Lauren would not interrupt. He operated a highly encrypted laptop disconnected from his law firm network. As a brilliant tax attorney, he knew exactly how the federal government processed major financial crimes. The Internal Revenue Service operates a highly lucrative and strictly confidential whistleblower program. They actively reward individuals who provide actionable intelligence on massive tax evasion and corporate fraud. Jamal opened the secure federal portal. He did not use his own name. He utilized a sophisticated digital routing sequence to mask his physical location and establish an anonymous profile. He began uploading the structured data files we extracted from Harrison's hidden folders. He uploaded the corporate formation documents for M&H Holdings. He attached the fraudulent employer identification numbers. He provided the exact transaction logs, detailing how Harrison layered commingled marital funds through temporary shell accounts to artificially inflate his liquidity. Jamal typed a precise legal brief to accompany the digital evidence. He outlined the exact federal statutes Harrison and Monica violated. He detailed the creation of a ghost financial profile to bypass commercial lending regulations. He highlighted the deliberate concealment of taxable assets and the fraudulent misrepresentation of corporate liability. Jamal knew federal agents did not waste time on vague accusations. They required clean, verifiable data. He handed them a perfectly wrapped criminal indictment on a silver platter. He reviewed the comprehensive submission one final time, checking the attachments and verifying the hidden routing numbers. With a single click of his mouse, Jamal transmitted the entire highly explosive package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The federal machinery was officially in motion. Once the federal tax authorities open a formal fraud investigation, there is no amount of elite social influence or expensive corporate litigation that can stop them. Harrison had poked a sleeping bear, and Jamal just handed that bear a high-definition map directly to Harrison's front door. While Jamal handled the federal tax execution, David was aggressively moving on the private equity front. He sat staring at a massive dual-monitor setup. As a forensic accountant, David knew exactly how regional banks managed high-risk commercial debt. A $2.5 million bridge loan secured by a fragile shell company was a massive liability. David dialed a senior partner at a major private equity firm he consulted for. The firm acquired distressed commercial debt at a discount. David presented a highly lucrative acquisition target. He detailed the exact commercial warehouse district Harrison purchased. He highlighted the massive projected appreciation of the newly approved technology corridor. He explained the current debt holder was a mid-sized regional bank that would eagerly offload the risky bridge loan if they realized the borrower was fundamentally unstable. "How do we extract the debt?" the partner asked. David smiled coldly, looking at the financial models. "The borrower just finalized a hostile divorce settlement," David explained. He completely altered his marital asset structure. The collateral backing the bridge loan is profoundly compromised. Furthermore, the primary borrower is utilizing a highly questionable employer identification number. When the regional bank realizes the fundamental liability of this specific loan, they will panic. They will want the toxic debt off their balance sheets immediately. If your firm approaches them tomorrow morning with a clean cash offer to purchase the commercial debt outright, they will sell it to avoid default risk. By purchasing the debt, the private equity firm becomes Harrison's new direct creditor. "I am sending you the regional bank details," David said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Buy the debt, transfer the servicing rights to my immediate control. I will personally manage the portfolio collection." The partner agreed without hesitation. David ended the call. Tomorrow morning, the regional bank would trade that ticking time bomb for liquid cash. Harrison and Monica had absolutely no idea the betrayed husband was about to become their sole corporate landlord. The trap was fully armed and completely inescapable. The very next morning, the financial gears began to turn with brutal efficiency. David walked into the sleek glass and steel offices of the private equity firm, feeling a profound sense of absolute purpose. He carried a highly detailed dossier outlining the precise vulnerabilities of the commercial bridge loan held by the regional bank. As a forensic accountant, he knew exactly how to highlight the hidden toxic elements of a seemingly profitable lending agreement. He sat down in the main boardroom with the senior acquisition team and laid out the entire aggressive strategy. The commercial property itself was incredibly valuable. The abandoned warehouse district was perfectly positioned for massive appreciation due to the newly approved technology corridor. It was a massive gold mine waiting to be fully developed by the right corporate entity. However, the current borrower was a ticking time bomb. David expertly walked the senior partners through the critical structural weaknesses of the fragile shell company. He pointed out the deeply concerning employer identification numbers and the completely artificial liquidity profile that Harrison had illegally fabricated. He thoroughly explained that the primary borrower had just executed a hostile divorce settlement, effectively stripping away the core financial collateral that originally secured the high-risk bridge loan. The regional bank currently holding the debt was entirely unaware of this sudden and catastrophic change in the borrower's marital and overall financial status. The private equity partners immediately saw the blood in the water. They clearly understood the extreme value of the underlying real estate and the massive leverage they would gain by holding the distressed debt. Within the hour, their highly aggressive acquisition team initiated direct contact with the mid-sized regional bank. They did not reveal the specific details of Harrison's impending federal tax investigation or his incredibly messy divorce proceedings. They simply made a highly attractive all-cash offer to purchase the commercial paper at a slight discount, presenting it as a routine portfolio acquisition. But the smart acquisition team also dropped a highly calculated hint. They politely suggested that the regional bank might want to run a rapid routine compliance check on the liquidity covenants of their recent commercial borrowers, just as a standard measure of proper due diligence. That tiny seed of professional doubt was all it took to unravel the scheme. Regional banks are notoriously risk-averse institutions. They operate on incredibly tight margins and deeply fear federal regulatory audits more than anything else in the financial world. Behind the scenes, the regional bank underwriters immediately reviewed Harrison's entire loan file. They ran a quiet background compliance check and instantly discovered the sudden legal detachment of the marital residential property. They saw that the massive joint accounts had been legally divided and heavily drained just a few days prior. The required continuous liquidity covenant of exactly $500,000 was absolutely no longer being met. Harrison's financial profile had drastically transformed from a rock-solid dual-income household into a highly unstable single borrower, leveraging a newly formed and completely untested corporate shell entity. Pure panic spread through the regional bank's commercial lending department, exactly as David had skillfully predicted. The regional bank executives desperately wanted the toxic asset off their clean balance sheets before it triggered a mandatory federal regulatory reporting event. They absolutely did not want to deal with a messy public default or a prolonged expensive foreclosure process on a massive commercial property. When the private equity firm formally presented the finalized cash offer, the regional bank eagerly accepted the lucrative deal with truly shocking speed. The complex financial transaction was fully executed, cleanly processed, and legally bound before the traditional banking hours even concluded for the day. The private equity firm was now the sole legal owner of the massive $2.5 million commercial debt. They held the absolute rights to the mortgage, the commercial deed of trust, and the strict enforcement of every single financial covenant written directly into the original lending contract. The executive partners were so thoroughly impressed with David's impeccable forensic analysis and strategic foresight that they immediately appointed him as the exclusive portfolio manager for this specific acquisition. David now held complete unilateral control over the debt collection and covenant enforcement for the fragile shell company. The sheer poetic justice of the unfolding situation was truly staggering. Harrison had arrogantly spent the last 6 months sleeping with David's wife, secretly funneling money to build a fake corporate empire alongside her. Now David was legally serving as their uncompromising corporate landlord and absolute financial master. He controlled the exact timing of their inevitable and highly destructive collapse. While this massive financial transfer occurred in the sterile elite boardrooms of the city, Harrison remained completely and blissfully ignorant of his rapidly shifting reality. He was likely celebrating in a luxury hotel suite, with Monica happily toasting to their perceived ultimate victory. He genuinely believed he had just successfully divorced his naive wife for a measly $10,000 while cleanly walking away with a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal. He thought he was a brilliant elite wealth manager who had flawlessly executed the absolute perfect financial crime against his own family. He had absolutely no idea that the regional bank had permanently sold his debt. He had no idea that the man whose marriage he callously destroyed was currently sitting at a polished mahogany desk, carefully reviewing his loan covenants with a red pen, preparing to trigger a massive financial execution. I received the highly anticipated confirmation call from David while I was quietly unpacking my belongings in a comfortable modern apartment I had leased using my newly secured cash reserves. My new home was bright, airy, and entirely mine. The heavy, suffocating weight of the toxic family I had married into was completely gone. I answered the phone and clearly heard the quiet, intense satisfaction radiating in David's deep voice. "The acquisition is fully complete, Natalie," he proudly announced. "We own them." A full month passed since that pivotal phone call. If you looked solely at social media, you would assume Harrison and Monica had achieved the ultimate fairy tale ending. They wasted absolutely no time flaunting their perceived victory. My feeds were bombarded with their curated reality. Harrison posted photos of them, clinking champagne glasses on the balcony of a luxury high-rise. Monica uploaded daily updates about her new life as a prominent commercial developer. She posted stories showing off her brand new imported sports car and tagged M&H Holdings everywhere. They completely leaned into the fabricated narrative that they were misunderstood soulmates who finally escaped a toxic situation to build a lucrative corporate empire. The sheer audacity reached its peak when Patricia hosted an elaborate luncheon at her exclusive country club to formally welcome Monica into the family fold. Jamal gave me the full report since his wife Lauren forced him to attend. Patricia reserved the main dining room and invited 30 influential women from their elite social circle. She stood up, clinking her spoon against a crystal glass, giving a touching speech about how grateful she was that her son finally found a woman who truly understood the burdens of building generational wealth. She presented Monica with a vintage diamond tennis bracelet that had been in their family for 3 generations. It was a public spectacle designed to legitimize the affair and permanently cement Monica's status among the city's elite. They were celebrating their grand triumph, blissfully unaware that they were dancing on the edge of a massive financial cliff. While they spent their days loudly seeking social validation, I spent my days quietly building a fortress. I completely ignored the noise and channeled my energy into establishing my own independent commercial appraisal firm. I used a portion of the cash I legally secured to lease a bright modern office space in a respected business district. I did not need Harrison's money or his elite family connections to succeed. I had a decade of impeccable professional experience and a network of loyal clients who valued my analytical accuracy over high society gossip. Jamal stepped in as my dedicated legal counsel to properly structure the new corporate entity. We met several times a week in my new office, poring over complex legal documents and tax structures. Jamal was incredibly meticulous, ensuring that my firm was completely insulated from any potential blowback from the impending collapse of M&H Holdings. Working with Jamal was a revelation. Beneath his quiet demeanor was a razor-sharp legal mind that had been entirely wasted on a family that only cared about the color of his skin. We formed a genuine friendship bonded by our shared survival. "Your corporate veil is completely impenetrable," Natalie Jamal announced one afternoon, sliding the finalized formation documents across my desk. "You are officially the sole owner and primary operator of a fully licensed commercial appraisal firm. No one can ever take this away from you." I signed the documents feeling true independence. No longer an accessory to a wealthy husband, I was the absolute master of my own financial destiny. But as satisfying as it was, the ultimate task remained incomplete. The trap we set was fully armed, but we needed the absolute perfect moment to pull the trigger. David provided that moment during our weekly strategic briefing. We met at a quiet coffee shop far from the downtown financial district. David looked incredibly relaxed, radiating the quiet confidence of a man holding a royal flush. "Harrison just sent out the formal invitations," David said, sliding an elegant black and gold card across the cafe table. "He is hosting a grand opening gala for the newly renovated commercial warehouse district this coming Friday. He invited the mayor, several city council members, and every major player in the regional real estate market. He wants to publicly establish M&H Holdings as the premier development firm." I looked at the luxurious invitation, studying the bold, arrogant font. It was the perfect stage. Harrison was gathering all the important people he desperately wanted to impress into one single room. He was building the highest possible pedestal to ensure his fall would be absolutely devastating. "Is the regional bank fully detached?" I asked, verifying our tactical position. "Completely," David confirmed, taking a sip of his black coffee. My private equity firm holds the exclusive rights to the bridge loan. Harrison breached the continuous liquidity covenant exactly 28 days ago, when he finalized your divorce settlement. He has been in technical default for a month. We have the absolute legal authority to accelerate the debt and demand immediate full repayment of the $2.5 million. And what about the federal tax investigation? I asked, turning to Jamal, who had just joined our table. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division has officially flagged the fraudulent employer identification numbers. Jamal reported, his voice dropping to a whisper. They froze the shell company accounts this morning. Harrison does not know it yet because he has not tried to move any massive funds today. The federal agents are currently building the formal indictment. The entire corporate structure is completely and permanently compromised beyond any repair. I leaned back in my chair looking at the two brilliant men sitting across from me. We had systematically dismantled every single pillar of Harrison's fake empire. The commercial debt was weaponized. The federal tax trap was fully triggered. His social standing was about to become his biggest liability. Friday night, I stated my voice perfectly calm and resolute. We let him give his grand speech. We let him stand in front of the entire city and claim his fake victory. And then we walk through those heavy doors and take absolutely everything away from him. David smiled a cold, calculating smile. Friday night, he agreed perfectly. The final appraisal is due. Friday night arrived with a crisp chill in the air, setting the perfect atmosphere for high society to gather. The abandoned warehouse district had been completely transformed into a spectacle of modern industrial luxury. M&H Holdings had spared absolutely no expense for their grand opening gala. Massive searchlights swept across the night sky, drawing attention to the beautifully restored brick facades. A fleet of valet attendants hustled to park a seemingly endless stream of imported luxury vehicles. A plush red carpet led guests through the towering glass entrance doors into a massive atrium bathed in warm golden light. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated smoothly, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and expensive caviar appetizers. The guest list was a testament to Harrison's aggressive networking and his parents' deep social influence. The mayor stood near the center of the room, laughing loudly at a joke Richard had just told. Several prominent city council members mingled near the open bar, discussing future zoning opportunities. The most powerful regional real estate investors were all present, sizing up the newly renovated commercial space with greedy eyes. Patricia floated through the wealthy crowd, wearing a glittering emerald gown, acting as if she had personally laid every single brick in the building. She proudly introduced Monica to anyone who would listen, making sure to emphasize that her new future daughter-in-law possessed the exact kind of visionary business acumen their elite family required. Lauren stood near a massive floral arrangement, snapping endless photographs for her social media followers, completely oblivious to the massive financial crater opening beneath her very feet. In the center of it all stood Harrison and Monica, soaking in the absolute adoration of the city's elite. Harrison wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo that fit him flawlessly, radiating the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had successfully conquered the world. Monica clung to his arm, wearing a stunning silver designer gown. The vintage diamond tennis bracelet Patricia had gifted her sparkled brightly under the strategic gallery lighting. They looked like the perfect corporate power couple, completely untouchable and destined for limitless success. Every handshake they accepted and every congratulatory toast they drank only inflated their massive egos further. As the evening progressed, the ambient jazz music slowly faded out. The main event was about to begin. A wide stage had been erected at the far end of the grand atrium, framed by two massive digital screens displaying the sleek new logo for M&H Holdings. A spotlight snapped on, illuminating a polished wooden podium. The crowd naturally gravitated toward the stage, their murmurs dying down as they waited for the man of the hour to speak. Harrison patted Monica's hand gently before striding up the short flight of stairs. He stepped up to the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium with an air of complete authority. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, politicians, and adoring family members. He let the silence stretch for a moment, basking in the undivided attention of the entire room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Harrison began, his voice booming clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. He flashed his signature brilliant smile, the one he used to disarm wealthy clients and manipulate naive partners. "Tonight is not just a celebration of a new commercial development. It is the culmination of a massive personal journey. When Monica and I first envisioned M&H Holdings, we did not just want to buy real estate. We wanted to build a lasting legacy from the ground up. We looked at this abandoned warehouse district, and we did not see urban decay. We saw limitless potential. We saw the future of this great city." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Richard nodded proudly from the front row, while Patricia wiped a fake tear from her eye. Harrison raised a hand to quiet the room, his expression shifting into a mask of deep manufactured sincerity. "Building a legacy requires absolute sacrifice," Harrison continued, his tone dripping with profound dramatic irony. "It requires making incredibly difficult decisions and leaving behind things that no longer serve your ultimate vision. There were times over the past year when the obstacles seemed entirely insurmountable. There were people who doubted our ambition. There were individuals who simply lacked the capacity to understand the massive risks required to achieve true greatness. But Monica and I refused to let mediocrity anchor us down. We pushed forward. We invested everything we had into this vision. We put our absolute faith in each other and in the undeniable value of hard work and unyielding determination." Harrison paused to take a sip of water, letting his arrogant words sink into the minds of the wealthy attendees. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice to convey a false sense of humble gratitude. "They say that true wealth is not just about capital," Harrison stated, sweeping his gaze across the room. "True wealth is about surrounding yourself with people who elevate your standard of excellence. I want to thank my incredibly supportive parents, Richard and Patricia, for teaching me the fundamental principles of generational success. I want to thank the city officials here tonight for believing in our massive revitalization project. And most importantly, I want to thank Monica, my brilliant partner in both business and life, for having the courage to leap into the unknown with me." Harrison smiled broadly, opening his arms wide to encompass the entire luxurious space. "Tonight, we officially open the doors to a brand new era. We stand on a foundation that we built with our own two hands. We have secured our financial future, and nobody can ever take this away from us. Welcome to M&H Holdings." The massive crowd erupted into thunderous applause, loudly raising their expensive champagne glasses high in the crisp air to wildly celebrate the arrogant man standing victoriously on the grand illuminated stage. The massive crowd erupted into thunderous applause, raising champagne glasses to celebrate the arrogant man standing victoriously on the grand illuminated stage. Harrison soaked in the adulation, closing his eyes to memorize the feeling of absolute supremacy. He reached out to pull Monica closer, ready to signal the waitstaff to begin pouring champagne for the final toast. That was the exact moment the orchestrated illusion began to violently unravel. From the far left side of the atrium, a solitary figure separated himself from the cheering crowd and walked deliberately toward the stage stairs. It was Jamal. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate respect, but his presence at the front of the room was entirely unscripted. Lauren was the first family member to notice her husband breaking rank. She stood near the floral arrangements, her smile dropping into a harsh scowl. She hissed his name, waving her hand frantically, signaling for him to return to the shadows. Patricia and Richard noticed the commotion next. Patricia clutched her gown, flushing with sudden embarrassment. In their elitist minds, Jamal was nothing more than a diversity token they tolerated at family dinners. They expected him to humiliate their public image. They thought he drank too much at the open bar and was going to make an inappropriate toast. Richard stepped forward, intending to intercept his son-in-law before he could reach the stairs. But Jamal moved with the precision of a seasoned tax attorney, Entering a federal courtroom, he bypassed Richard entirely, stepping up the short flight of stairs with complete authority. The polite applause from the guests began to falter as they sensed a disruption. The smooth jazz music that was supposed to cue up for the toast remained silent. Harrison glared at the man invading his spotlight. The arrogant wealth manager forced a tight, strained smile, trying desperately to maintain control of the optics. He leaned toward the microphone, intending to pass this off as an unplanned family tribute. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced, his voice dripping with forced joviality, "it looks like my brother-in-law Jamal wants to add a few words to the celebration. Let us give him a warm welcome." A smattering of confused applause rippled through the elite crowd. Harrison stepped back slightly, offering Jamal the podium, but keeping a firm warning grip on the edge of the wooden stand. He leaned in close to Jamal, whispering viciously under his breath, "What the hell are you doing? Get off my stage right now before I have security throw you out." Jamal did not flinch. He did not look at Harrison with anger. He simply looked at him with profound, forensic pity. Jamal stepped directly to the center of the podium, completely ignoring Harrison's whisper. Jamal reached out with a steady hand and tapped the microphone twice. The sharp thud echoed loudly through the massive commercial atrium, silencing the remaining murmurs in the room. Every eye in the building was locked on the attorney. The mayor, the real estate investors, and the horrified family members waited in breathless anticipation. Jamal looked out over the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns. His voice when he spoke was incredibly calm, resonant, and entirely devoid of hesitation. "Sorry to interrupt, brother-in-law," Jamal stated clearly, his voice projecting flawlessly through the sound system. "But this building does not actually belong to you." The immediate reaction from the crowd was a collective gasp, followed by a rapid swell of confused murmurs. People exchanged bewildered glances, lowering their champagne glasses. Patricia let out a noise of pure outrage from the front row, while Richard looked ready to suffer a cardiac event. Lauren covered her face. Harrison turned pale, his smile vanishing instantly. He reached for the microphone to cut the audio feed, but Jamal blocked his hand, stepping firmly between Harrison and the sound equipment. "Do not touch the microphone, Harrison." Jamal warned, his voice dropping into a tone that promised severe legal consequences. "I highly advise you to stand still and listen to what is about to happen. You spent the entire evening boasting about building a legacy from the ground up. You thanked your parents and your financial consultant for her courage, but you forgot to thank the people who funded this commercial acquisition." Jamal continued, his voice echoing over the growing panic. "You forgot to mention that M&H Holdings is nothing more than a fragile corporate shell built entirely on stolen marital assets and fraudulent federal tax filings." The murmurs morphed into shocked exclamations. The mayor took a discreet step backward, distancing himself from the stage. The regional real estate investors narrowed their eyes, evaluating the property through a lens of extreme financial risk. Harrison panicked, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. "Turn off the microphone," he screamed at the audio technicians in the back. "He is lying. He is a disgruntled family member having a mental breakdown. Security, remove him immediately." Jamal smiled, a cold, calculating smile that froze Harrison in his tracks. "No one is going to remove me, Harrison," Jamal stated, projecting his powerful voice over the chaos. "Because I am not the one who committed federal banking fraud. I am not the one who used a stolen employer identification number to secure a $2.5 million bridge loan. I am just the messenger delivering your final audit. You thought you manipulated the financial system to rob your wife and build an empire with your mistress. But you made one critical mathematical error. You assumed the people you betrayed would walk away quietly." Jamal paused, letting his accusations settle over the paralyzed audience. He looked toward the heavy glass entrance doors at the far end of the atrium. His timing was absolutely impeccable. "I am just the opening act," Jamal announced, stepping back from the podium and gesturing toward the main entrance. "I believe the actual owners of this property just arrived to collect your debt." The heavy glass double doors at the far end of the grand atrium swung open with a resounding thud. Every head turned toward the sudden noise. I stepped across the threshold side by side with David. We did not arrive dressed for a party. I wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute corporate authority. David mirrored my professional demeanor in a crisp black suit holding a thick briefcase. Flanking us were two stern men representing the highest levels of corporate banking compliance. The wealthy guests fell completely silent. The crowd naturally parted, forming a wide, clear path down the center of the room. The extravagant atmosphere of the high society gala vanished entirely, replaced by the chilling tension of a corporate execution. I kept my eyes locked directly on Harrison as we walked down the plush red carpet. His face was a mask of absolute horror. He gripped the wooden podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. Monica shrank back behind him, her hands trembling violently. Patricia and Richard stood frozen in the front row, their mouths hanging open in utter disbelief. They had spent the last month spreading vicious lies, claiming I was destitute and hiding in shame. Yet here I was marching confidently into their exclusive event, flanked by top-tier financial executives. I reached the short flight of stairs leading up to the stage. David stopped at the base, standing like an immovable sentinel beside the banking representatives. I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking sharply. Jamal greeted me with a respectful nod, his eyes shining with quiet triumph. He handed me the microphone and gracefully stepped back, yielding the floor. I stood at the center of the stage, looking out over the sea of faces. The mayor, the city council members, and the regional real estate investors were all staring at me, waiting for the final verdict. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the massive speakers. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Natalie. I am a licensed commercial real estate appraiser. I spend my entire professional life evaluating the true structural and financial worth of properties exactly like this one. And until precisely 1 month ago, I was also married to the man standing cowering behind me." A collective gasp rippled through the elite audience. Harrison opened his mouth to object, but the sheer weight of the room forced him to remain silent. "Tonight, Harrison stood before you and boasted about his brilliant business acumen." I continued pacing slowly across the stage. "He painted a beautiful picture of a self-made legacy built on vision and sacrifice. But as an appraiser, it is my fundamental job to strip away the fresh paint and look directly at the underlying foundation. And the foundation of M&H Holdings is completely rotten. Let me break down the actual financial reality of this magnificent warehouse district you are standing in today. This property was not purchased with visionary capital. It was acquired using a highly volatile $2.5 million commercial bridge loan. I saw the regional real estate investors in the crowd nod, recognizing the terminology. "Bridge loans are incredibly risky instruments," I explained, keeping my tone strictly educational, but cutting. "They require massive collateral and impeccable financial stability to secure." Harrison was able to secure this massive loan because he legally leveraged our shared marital home. The same home I personally paid the $200,000 down payment for. He also artificially inflated his corporate profile by linking the loan to our highly robust joint savings accounts. He used my money, my pristine credit, and my home to secretly fund this entire commercial venture with his mistress. Monica let out a loud sob, burying her face in her hands, but the crowd offered her absolutely no sympathy. The investors were now looking at Harrison with pure professional disgust. "But commercial banks are not stupid," I stated, raising my hand to emphasize the point. "When they issue a multi-million-dollar loan to a fragile, untested shell company, they attach very strict conditions. Specifically, they attached a continuous liquidity covenant. This legal clause mandated that Harrison maintain a verifiable liquid cash balance of exactly $500,000 across his linked portfolios at all times. If his verified liquidity dropped below that threshold for even 48 hours, the loan would go into immediate technical default." Harrison finally understood. I watched his eyes widen as the devastating mathematical reality crashed down upon his arrogant mind. 30 days ago, Harrison forced me into a highly aggressive divorce settlement I revealed looking directly into the cameras being held by the guests. He and his corporate lawyers threatened to ruin me if I did not sign a non-disclosure agreement and legally relinquish all my rights to the marital home. He threw a $10,000 check in my face and told me to walk away. He thought he was being incredibly ruthless. He thought he was winning. But he failed to understand the mechanics of his own commercial debt. The exact moment I picked up that black pen and legally detached my name from the residential deed, I severed the primary collateral holding up his entire empire. I declared, my voice ringing with absolute finality. The moment our hostile divorce was formally filed, the joint accounts were completely separated, and his personal debt-to-income ratio was instantly and permanently destabilized. By forcing me out of the marriage to protect his fake public reputation, Harrison willfully and irreparably breached the strict liquidity clause of his commercial bridge loan. He has been secretly operating in a state of catastrophic technical default for an entire month without realizing it. This grand opening event is nothing more than an elaborate and desperate financial illusion. You are not standing in the headquarters of a premier development firm. You are standing inside of a legally foreclosed commercial asset right now. The profound silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The elite guests stared at the pristine brick walls of the grand atrium, suddenly viewing the luxurious space as a massive financial crime scene. Harrison gripped the wooden podium, his knuckles completely white. He shook his head frantically, attempting to reject the devastating reality I had just outlined. He looked at the regional real estate investors in the front row, desperately trying to salvage his shattered professional image. "She is lying!" Harrison shouted, his voice cracking with intense panic. "She is a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin my grand opening. My commercial bridge loan is perfectly secure. The regional bank has not issued any default notices to M&H Holdings. You are making a massive fool of yourself, Natalie." David stepped forward, moving to stand directly beside me on the illuminated stage. He placed his thick leather briefcase onto the polished wooden podium, completely ignoring Harrison's frantic attempts to physically block him. Harrison recognized David immediately from our anniversary dinner. The arrogant wealth manager let out a harsh, desperate laugh. "And who is this?" Harrison sneered, pointing a shaking finger at David. "Are you letting your new boyfriend fight your legal battles now, Natalie? You brought the forensic accountant to a real estate gala. This is incredibly pathetic." David did not react to the petty insult. He calmly opened the heavy leather briefcase and extracted a thick stack of formal financial documents. "I am not here to discuss your personal life, Harrison," David stated, his deep voice projecting absolute corporate authority through the massive speakers. "I am here strictly on official corporate business. You are absolutely correct that the regional bank has not issued a default notice to M&H Holdings. That is because the regional bank no longer owns your commercial debt. They ran a routine compliance check 30 days ago and discovered your catastrophic liquidity breach. They panicked. They wanted your highly toxic asset off their clean balance sheets immediately." David held up the thick stack of legal documents so the entire room could see the official corporate seals. "They sold your distressed commercial paper to a major private equity firm." David continued, his tone incredibly steady and precise. "They sold it at a massive discount to avoid the extreme liability you created. I am the senior debt manager for that specific private equity firm. My corporate team finalized the aggressive acquisition of your $2.5 million bridge loan exactly 28 days ago. I am your new corporate landlord, Harrison. I own the exclusive rights to your mortgage, your commercial deed of trust, and the strict enforcement of every single financial covenant written directly into your original lending contract." The color completely drained from Harrison's face. He stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. Monica let out a high-pitched wail, clutching her designer gown in absolute terror. The prominent city council members and the mayor began slowly backing away from the stage, wanting absolutely nothing to do with this massive financial disaster. Patricia and Richard stood completely frozen, their aristocratic arrogance entirely erased by the terrifying presence of a highly organized corporate executioner. But a simple liquidity breach is merely a civil financial matter, David declared, turning his intense gaze toward Monica. As a forensic accountant, I conducted a thorough audit of your corporate formation documents prior to acquiring the distressed debt. M&H Holdings is not just technically insolvent, it is a completely fraudulent enterprise. When you applied for the commercial bridge loan, you knew Monica's terrible personal credit history would trigger an immediate rejection. So you fabricated her corporate profile. You illegally utilized a stolen employer identification number from a dissolved subsidiary company to mask her identity. You presented forged federal documents to a federally insured lending institution to secure $2.5 million. The regional real estate investors in the audience gasped audibly. A technical default was bad business, but federal banking fraud was a highly contagious corporate disease. Nobody wanted to stand anywhere near a man about to be indicted by the federal government. Harrison was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he stared at the meticulous forensic accountant who had systematically dismantled his entire life. "You cannot do this," Harrison stammered, his voice barely a terrified whisper. "You are making this up. This is a personal vendetta." "There is absolutely nothing personal about corporate debt collection," David replied smoothly. "You signed a legally binding commercial contract containing a strict acceleration clause. Because you willfully breached the continuous liquidity covenant, and because you executed severe federal banking fraud to secure the initial capital, my private equity firm is exercising our absolute legal right to accelerate your debt immediately. You no longer have a 30-year repayment schedule, Harrison." David pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the top of the stack and slammed it down onto the wooden podium right in front of Harrison's terrified face. "This is your formal and final notice of immediate debt acceleration," David announced, his voice echoing with devastating finality. M&H Holdings currently owes my private equity firm exactly $2.5 million plus accrued penalty interest. The entire massive balance is due in full by the end of the business day tomorrow. If the wire transfer does not clear our corporate accounts by 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, we will legally seize this entire commercial property. We will liquidate the asset and we will personally sue both you and Monica for any remaining financial deficit. You have exactly 24 hours to find $2.5 million, Harrison. Your grand legacy is officially canceled. The immense weight of the massive corporate threat crushed whatever remaining defiance Harrison possessed. He looked out at the silent, judging crowd of elite investors who were previously praising his visionary genius. They now looked at him like a highly toxic financial liability they desperately needed to avoid forever. The immense weight of the massive corporate threat crushed whatever remaining defiance Harrison possessed. He looked out at the silent, judging crowd of elite investors who were previously praising his visionary genius. They now looked at him like a highly toxic financial liability they desperately needed to avoid forever. Harrison began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved rapidly beneath his bespoke velvet tuxedo. The confident posture of the brilliant wealth manager vanished, replaced by the frantic gasping of a drowning man. He stumbled backward, gripping the edges of the polished wooden podium to keep his knees from buckling. The microphone picked up the ragged sound of his breathing. Monica was sobbing uncontrollably near the screen displaying their worthless corporate logo. Harrison looked wildly around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face among the wealthy politicians and regional developers he had invited. He found none. The mayor discreetly signaled his security detail and was already moving swiftly toward the exit doors. The real estate investors were furiously typing on cell phones, ensuring zero financial exposure. Realizing his professional network had instantly abandoned him, Harrison turned toward the only safety net he knew. He looked down into the front row at his parents. Richard stood rigidly, his face a mask of horror, while Patricia gripped his arm with white-knuckled desperation. Harrison leaped off the stage and stumbled directly toward his father, He grabbed Richard's tailored jacket, his eyes wide with sheer panic. "Dad, you have to help me," Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking. "You heard what David said. They are going to seize the commercial property tomorrow evening and sue me for the remaining deficit. I will be completely ruined. You have to liquidate the family trust fund right now. Wire the $2.5 million directly into my corporate account first thing tomorrow morning. We can pay off the accelerated debt and save the building." Richard hesitated, looking nervously around the emptying room. The family trust was their crown jewel that funded their extravagant lifestyle and shielded generational wealth from taxation. Liquidating a massive portion overnight would incur staggering penalties and expose assets to intense regulatory scrutiny. Harrison shook his father's shoulders frantically. "Dad, please listen to me," he begged. "If I lose this property, the federal bank fraud investigation will absolutely destroy me. I will lose my wealth management license and go to federal prison. You have to use the trust fund. It is the only liquid asset massive enough to cover the immediate debt acceleration. Save me, Dad. Save our legacy." Richard looked at the terrified face of his golden boy. Despite his profound disappointment, he could not watch his son go to federal prison. He swallowed hard, adjusting his collar, and nodded slowly. "Okay, Harrison," Richard said, his voice trembling slightly. "I will call the wealth managers in the morning. We will authorize an emergency liquidation of the family trust to cover the commercial debt. We will fix this mess." A wave of profound relief washed over Harrison's sweaty face. He let out a shaky breath, believing he had narrowly escaped the corporate execution. He turned back toward the stage, a flicker of arrogance returning to his eyes. He thought his parents' immense wealth magically shielded him from consequence once again. But Jamal was not finished yet. My brilliant brother-in-law stepped forward, closing the physical distance between the stage and the huddled family. Jamal smoothly pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit jacket and tapped the screen, waking it up. He looked down at Richard and Harrison with an expression of absolute forensic pity. He did not raise his voice, but the intense authority in his tone commanded the immediate attention of everyone still lingering in the atrium. "I highly advise against making frantic phone calls to your wealth managers tomorrow morning," Richard Jamal stated calmly. "It will be a complete waste of your valuable time." Richard bristled at the interruption, his aristocratic pride flaring up despite the disastrous circumstances. "Keep out of this, Jamal," he snapped viciously. "This is a private financial matter concerning my family. You have absolutely no idea how generational wealth operates." "I know exactly how your generational wealth operates," Jamal countered, maintaining intense eye contact with his father-in-law. "I know you structured the family trust to aggressively shield assets from legitimate taxation. I know you manipulated my wife Lauren into hiding her personal investments within it. And I know Harrison illegally leveraged residential properties protected under that exact same trust to secure fraudulent commercial loans." Harrison froze, his newly found relief evaporating instantly. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice shaking again. Jamal looked directly at his smartphone screen, reading from a highly secure encrypted email he received earlier that afternoon. "I am talking about the consequences of profound corporate arrogance," Jamal explained. "As a tax attorney, I have a strict legal and ethical obligation to report massive financial crimes. I submitted a comprehensive whistleblower dossier to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I provided them with the fraudulent employer identification numbers, the illegal asset layering, and direct evidence of extensive federal tax evasion connected to both M&H Holdings and your precious family trust." Patricia let out a sharp gasp. Richard turned a sickly gray. "And about that trust fund," Jamal continued, his voice echoing with devastating finality. "The Internal Revenue Service moves incredibly fast when handed a perfect roadmap to massive tax fraud. I just received official federal confirmation directly to my secure inbox. The IRS executed an emergency federal injunction this morning, They completely froze the entire family trust due to severe federal tax evasion and fraudulent asset sheltering. Your accounts are entirely locked. You cannot withdraw a single penny. You cannot liquidate assets to save your son. The wealth you hoarded is currently under total federal seizure. Richard and Patricia immediately collapsed in absolute shock onto the plush red carpet today. The sharp sound of their fall broke the remaining tension in the massive room. Waiters dropped silver trays of expensive champagne, sending fine crystal shattering across the polished floor, joining the chaotic symphony of their ruin. Lauren rushed forward, dropping her expensive smartphone to kneel beside her hyperventilating parents. But the fatal damage was already done. The elite guests, the very people Harrison and his family had spent decades desperately trying to impress, did not rush forward to offer assistance or sympathy. Instead, they did what high society always does when confronted with a spectacular public downfall. They eagerly pulled out their smartphones. The bright flashes of camera lenses illuminated the grand atrium, capturing every single pathetic moment of their absolute destruction. Harrison stood frozen on the stage, watching his meticulously crafted legacy dissolve into a viral public humiliation. The mayor was already out the heavy glass doors, surrounded by his security team, desperate to avoid any association with federal fraud. The regional investors were furiously typing messages to their corporate legal teams, severing all professional ties with Harrison and his disgraced wealth management firm. The social ruin was instantaneous, brutal, and completely irreversible. The city's elite were actively documenting the exact moment the powerful family lost absolutely everything they held dear. Then the screaming started. Monica, who had been cowering behind the wooden podium, finally processed the sheer magnitude of the financial crater she was standing in. She was not a brilliant commercial developer. She was a co-guarantor on a $2.5 million defaulted loan and a prime suspect in a massive federal bank fraud investigation. She turned violently toward Harrison, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed the lapels of his bespoke velvet tuxedo and shoved him hard against the heavy podium. "You lied to me!" Monica shrieked, her voice completely devoid of the sweet fake innocence she had weaponized for months. "You told me the money was clean. You told me you were a millionaire. You used a stolen identity to trap me in federal fraud. You completely ruined my life, Harrison. I am not going to federal prison because you wanted to play real estate tycoon with stolen money." Harrison tried to push her away desperately, looking at the dozens of glowing cameras recording their vicious domestic dispute. "Monica, calm down," he pleaded, his voice weak and utterly pathetic. "We can fix this. We just need to find a new investor." "There are no investors," Monica screamed, swatting his hands away with absolute disgust. "You are a complete fraud. You have absolutely nothing. Your accounts are frozen. Your parents are broke. I am leaving you right now, and I am telling the federal authorities that you forced me to sign those loan documents. I am the victim here." As she turned to flee the illuminated stage, David stepped directly into her path. He moved with the quiet, lethal grace of a man who had anticipated her exact reaction. He reached into his thick leather briefcase one final time. He did not pull out a commercial loan document. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and pressed it firmly against Monica's chest, forcing her to grab it before it fell. "You are absolutely not a victim, Monica," David stated, his deep voice cutting cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. "You are a willing participant who made a highly calculated gamble and lost everything." Monica stared at the heavy envelope, her hands shaking violently. "What is this?" she whispered, her eyes darting between David and the relentlessly recording guests. "Those are your formal divorce papers," David replied smoothly, "and a certified copy of the high-definition photographs my private investigator took of you and Harrison entering the Chicago boutique hotel. The same photographs I placed on the table at our anniversary dinner. When we got married, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement specifically containing a strict infidelity clause. You mocked me for it back then. You told me it was incredibly unromantic to plan for failure. But as a forensic accountant, I evaluate risk. Your infidelity legally triggered that exact clause the moment you stepped into that penthouse suite. Monica ripped open the envelope, scanning the legal documents with terrified, wide eyes. You get absolutely nothing, David confirmed, his voice devoid of any sympathy or warmth. You do not get the house. You do not get alimony. You get zero access to my savings or my investments. You walk away with the exact clothes on your back and half of a highly toxic $2.5 million commercial debt. I highly advise you to find a very good federal defense attorney immediately. You are going to need one by tomorrow morning. Monica dropped the papers onto the stage, letting them scatter across the floor. She looked at David, then at Harrison, and finally at the crowd of wealthy guests, recording her ultimate demise. She let out a guttural scream of pure despair, turning and running blindly off the stage. She pushed past the remaining waiters and fled through the grand atrium doors, disappearing into the cold night air without a single penny to her name. Harrison was left standing completely alone on the massive, illuminated stage. The bright spotlight that was meant to highlight his ultimate triumph now served only to expose his absolute failure to the entire world. His grand legacy was reduced to a viral joke circulating rapidly on social media before the gala had even officially ended. His parents were still sobbing on the floor, clutching their chests, as they finally realized their hoarded generational wealth was currently in the iron grip of the Internal Revenue Service. His sister Lauren was weeping silently, knowing her comfortable lifestyle and endless trust fund distributions were permanently over. His corporate career was entirely dead. No wealth management firm would ever hire a man actively indicted for federal tax evasion and massive bank fraud. His elite peers, the very individuals he sought to dominate, now viewed him with unfiltered contempt. They whispered among themselves, exchanging smug smiles as they witnessed the complete implosion of a family they had secretly despised for years. Harrison looked down at me, standing confidently at the base of the stairs next to Jamal and David. His arrogant facade was completely shattered, leaving behind a broken, terrified man who had sacrificed his loyal wife, his professional integrity, and his family fortune for absolutely nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was no longer the tension of anticipation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute and total ruin. I looked at the man who had tried to leave me destitute and felt absolutely zero pity. He had built a massive house of cards using stolen money and lies, and we had simply opened the window to let the cold truth blow it all down. 3 months have passed since that spectacular night at the commercial warehouse district. The fallout from the grand opening gala was swifter and far more brutal than even I had anticipated. Harrison was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and bank fraud. The regulatory boards immediately and permanently revoked his wealth management license, stripping away the only professional identity he ever cared about. He is currently awaiting trial, and according to Jamal, the federal prosecutors are refusing to offer any lenient plea deals. Harrison is facing a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. He completely lost the commercial property to David's private equity firm the very next day, and because of the severe financial deficit, he was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. Monica vanished from the city entirely, fleeing back to her hometown to face her own mountain of federal legal charges and overwhelming debt. She left behind absolutely everything she tried to steal from me. The generational wealth Harrison's family constantly weaponized against me completely evaporated. The Internal Revenue Service did not just freeze the family trust, they dismantled it entirely. To pay the astronomical federal tax penalties and avoid their own prison sentences, Richard and Patricia were forced to sell their sprawling estate. The luxurious brick colonial house with the heated swimming pool was auctioned off to the highest bidder. They now live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely ostracized by the elite social circles they once ruled. Their former wealthy friends refused to return their phone calls, treating them like highly contagious financial liabilities. The fake legacy they guarded so ruthlessly was finally reduced to nothing but dust and public disgrace. They learned the very hard way that you cannot buy your way out of federal tax evasion. Jamal executed his own exit strategy with the exact same flawless precision he applied to federal tax law. The day after the gala, he handed Lauren formal divorce papers. Because he knew exactly where she had illegally hidden her personal investments outside of the frozen trust, he legally secured exactly half of her remaining liquid assets. Lauren cried and begged, claiming she loved him, but Jamal simply walked away from the toxic manipulation forever. He took his brilliance and joined my newly established commercial appraisal firm as a full-time legal partner. Our business is absolutely booming. Clients appreciate our ruthless dedication to the truth and our absolute refusal to cut corners. We built a corporate environment based on mutual respect and genuine integrity, proving that you do not need to step on others to achieve massive financial success. We sit in our bright modern office overlooking the city, completely free from the suffocating judgment of a family that never valued our true worth. Our success is our best revenge. Yesterday afternoon, I met David at a quiet corner cafe downtown. It was not a romantic date, and there were no rushed Hollywood cliches about trauma bonding turning into immediate love. We are simply two professionals who survived a massive betrayal and successfully took our power back. We sat at a small wooden table, drinking black coffee and watching the busy city streets outside the large glass window. David handed me a final signed document confirming the total liquidation of M&H Holdings. We did not need to celebrate loudly. We just shared a quiet nod of profound mutual respect. We had faced the absolute worst kind of deception, and instead of letting it destroy us, we used our unique skills to rewrite the entire ending. David paid for the coffee, and we walked out into the warm afternoon sun, heading in different directions, but both moving forward with complete and total freedom. It was the perfect closure. They thought they could break me and rewrite my history to fit their incredibly selfish narrative. They assumed I was just a naive accessory they could easily discard when I was no longer convenient. But they forgot one crucial detail about who I am and what I do. I appraise the true value of things for a living. I look past the expensive staging and the fresh paint to find the absolute truth hidden underneath. And when I finally turned that professional analytical lens onto my own life, I realized my personal worth was far too high to let them continue discounting it. You cannot allow toxic people to dictate your value. When someone continuously tries to convince you that you are worthless, it is usually because they are absolutely terrified you will wake up and realize how incredibly expensive you truly are. It is incredibly painful to walk away from a life you spent years trying to build. But bankrupting a toxic relationship is often the only way to save your own soul. You must choose yourself every time. Have you ever had to walk away from people who fundamentally underestimated your true worth? Have you ever been forced to destroy a toxic environment to protect your own peace of mind? I would love to hear your personal stories of resilience and transformation in the comments section below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to hear more authentic stories about reclaiming your power and demanding the respect you truly deserve. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with a toxic family dynamic right now, and remind them that they have the ultimate power to rewrite their own narrative. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredibly empowering journey today. Always remember to assess your own value accurately and never settle for a single penny less than what you are truly worth. Your ultimate happiness depends entirely on your willingness to recognize your priceless value and fiercely protect it from those who seek to tear you down for their own selfish gain. Stay strong, my wonderful friends, and please always remember to stay completely authentic forever. The most profound lesson embedded in this story is the absolute necessity of understanding your own intrinsic value, especially when you are surrounded by people who actively try to diminish it. In the narrative, Harrison and his elitist family constantly weaponized their generational wealth and social status to make Natalie feel small, powerless, and entirely dependent on their conditional approval. They treated her like a depreciating asset, expecting her to quietly accept their disrespect and manipulation to preserve a fake public image. However, the turning point of the entire ordeal did not rely on screaming matches or emotional breakdowns. It relied entirely on a cold, calculated self-appraisal. When you accurately recognize your own worth, the manipulative tactics of toxic individuals immediately lose their power over you. Natalie used her professional expertise as a commercial real estate appraiser to evaluate her personal life. She looked past the expensive facade of her marriage and identified the deep structural rot underneath. By refusing to let arrogant and deceitful people dictate her financial and emotional baseline, she was able to legally detach herself from a highly destructive environment. This story teaches us that true independence is never just about having money in an isolated bank account. It is about possessing the profound internal certainty that you deserve respect, honesty, and a life completely free from psychological abuse. Sometimes you have to completely bankrupt a toxic relationship to save your own soul and rebuild your future on a foundation of genuine integrity. You must be willing to walk away from the illusion of security to protect your absolute peace of mind. Your value absolutely does not decrease based on someone else's terrible inability to see your worth. Please share your own experiences of reclaiming your personal power in the comments below and subscribe to join our community of strong, independent survivors.